Long before love was measured in roses or rings, it was measured in quiet. In the hushed corners of a stone-walled room, love was not loud, it was thoughtful, intimate, and fragile. The night of a medieval marriage did not begin with passion or poetry. It began with symbols. The first was the candle, a single flame flickering against the cold, damp air. It wasn't just for light, it was for trust. If the candle stayed lit as the bride entered the room, some believed their bond would be blessed. But if it sputtered, if the flame wavered or died, there were whispers. Whispers that their love would be tested, that something or someone might drift away. The candle was placed not on a table, but low at the foot of the bed. It was to bear silent witness to what would follow. The second symbol was the featherbed. In an age where most slept on straw or bare planks, a featherbed was rare, often made in hand, stuffed with goose down, sewn with thread from a mother's wedding veil, and kept hidden until the right night. Unfurling it was ceremonial, quiet, reverent, as if love had to be unwrapped with care. Some households added dried herbs, lavender for calm, rosemary for courage, tucked inside the seams, stitched in like hope. And then there was the key. Small, iron, cold to the touch. It was handed to the bride, not with words, but with eyes. And what it unlocked was not wealth, but responsibility. The pantry, the spice box, the grain stores. By giving her the key, the husband was not just welcoming her into his home, he was entrusting her with survival. And in that age, survival was love. The key, small, iron, slightly rusted with time, was never meant to impress. It was meant to endure. In many medieval regions, it was the first object a woman could legally carry that symbolized power, not over people, but over place. In the quiet domain of storage and survival, she ruled. When a man gave his bride the household key, he was doing more than handing over a tool. He was making a vow without speaking. And she, by accepting it, was entering not just a home, but a role, a keeper, a guardian, a weaver of order. Love here was not fiery. It was built of layers, like stone upon stone. In troubadour songs, women were praised not for their smiles, but for their hands, their ability to open the larder with grace, to measure grain with justice. One famous lyric read, "She unlocks with fingers like prayer. She binds hunger with care." In archaeological digs across Normandy, small bundles have been found buried beside women. A linen cloth, a dried rose, and keys wrapped in ribbon. Not keys of treasure, but of preservation. In a convent attic in eastern France, a diary was uncovered in 1976. It belonged to a woman named Alex, married in 1291. In one entry she wrote, "He gave me no gold, but 3 iron keys. I loved him for that. They opened things that fed our children." This was love, forged in flour, sealed with barley. Quiet, real, and meant to last. In a world where love was rarely chosen, the bed became a kind of quiet rebellion. Not against the family, nor the church, but against coldness. The feather bed, soft and low, became the only place where 2 strangers, now bound by contract, could meet as humans. It wasn't covered in silk or velvet. Its sheets were often plain,
hand-stitched and blessed with sprigs of thyme or a tucked clove of garlic for protection. In Yorkshire, brides were known to stitch their names into the hem with red thread, one continuous line said to bind their heart to the bed and their fate to the man beside them. A folk tale passed down by midwives tells of a woman who slipped rosemary under her husband's pillow. When asked why, she whispered, "So he dreams of kindness, even if he forgets me." The bed held stories, not always joyful ones. In 1312, a woman in Bruges was accused of using herbs to seduce her husband. She replied before court, "It was not a spell, it was rosemary and mercy." The charges were dropped, not because they believed her, but because the judge's wife used the same herbs. The candle did not just flicker, it remembered. In a room where no one spoke of desire, the candle stood guard. At the foot of the bed, close enough to warm, but never close enough to touch, it burned, not to light the lovers' faces, but to record the vow they could not say aloud. In some villages, it was believed that if wax dripped cleanly down the side, the marriage would be harmonious. But if it ran wild, spilling, puddling, curving like a serpent, there would be trouble. A superstition? Perhaps. But for the couples who stared at it in silence, it became a kind of mirror. In Florence, a groom once carved a line into the base of their wedding candle. "What burns tonight shall guard tomorrow." That same candle was passed down to his daughter and then her daughter. When the wax finally melted down to the carved line, they say her husband returned from war. In monastic records, some couples asked for their candle to remain lit for 7 nights, not for beauty, but because they feared their love might cool without its warmth. One priest, writing in Latin in the margins of a prayer book, noted, "The fire of the heart is shy. It prefers not to be watched, and yet it needs a witness." That was the candle's role. It did not glow, it bore silent testimony. In the dark, it spoke for them, and when it flickered, it whispered, "Still here." Modern weddings echo with laughter, with toasts, with music swelling through chandeliers. But in the medieval chamber, the night began and ended in silence. Not because nothing was felt, but because everything was sacred. Love in those hours was not loud. It was a glance held too long, a blanket pulled slowly, a breath that didn't rush. In some households, speaking during the first night was discouraged. The belief was simple: the body already knows. Let it guide the spirit. In an old Germanic custom, couples would share a bowl of warm milk and honey before lying down. No words, just one shared cup, so that the last taste before sleep would be the same for both. A monk wrote in 1259, "Words fracture the mystery. Let them sleep before they try to speak it." There's a tale passed down in Burgundy of a couple who for 7 years never spoke a word in bed. Not from distance, but devotion. They said nothing because they wanted every silence to mean something. And when the wife died, her husband whispered one word into the pillow before leaving the room. Always. That was enough. The night wasn't made for explanations. It was made for vows too deep for language, for gestures, for warmth, for stillness. In the world outside, church bells rang and nobles dined. But in that small room, with one featherbed, one candle, and one key under the pillow, love was not declared, it was lived, quietly, deeply, and sometimes forever. The morning after, the candle burned low, and the bedfed was gently folded away. There were still some couples who had never stood before an altar. Their vows had no witness in robes, no golden rings, no recorded names in church books, but their love was not less real. It was simply older. In the hills and fields beyond the reach of the cathedral bell, promises were made in whispers, under oak trees, by rivers, or beside small fires, lit not by faith, but by feeling. In these places, a different kind of union was born. It was called hand-fasting, a ritual older than the church itself, where lovers would bind their hands together, sometimes with ribbon, sometimes with braided grass, and speak only to each other. No priest, no parchment, just two voices, one to ask, one to answer. In a 14th century diary found near the village of Keswick, a woman named Ellen wrote, "He tied my hand with green wool and asked if I would stay. I said nothing, but I didn't leave. That was enough." In many regions, such a promise was seen as binding for a year and a day. If the couple still remained after that, they were wed in spirit, if not in scripture. And sometimes they remained longer than those married under domes of stone. Church officials tried to ban the practice, calling it pagan, unholy, dangerous. But the people didn't forget. Because before the bells, before the priests, before even the parchment, there was the promise. And some promises, whispered beneath stars, lasted far longer than those spoken beneath gold. In a world without calendars on walls or numbered dates on screens, love didn't move by schedule. It moved by seasons. A look across the well in spring, a hand that lingered too long during the harvest, a shared cup of cider in autumn, where lips touched the same rim and neither pulled away. These were courtships, quiet, slow, and without labels. No one said, "He's my boyfriend," or "We're official." They said, "He walks with me after market," or "She brings me the soft pears first." In some villages, lovers carved their initials into tree bark beside rivers, believing the flow would carry their promise to the gods of nature. Others wore bits of woven cloth on their wrists, tiny threads dyed with herbs or berries, each color meaning something only the two of them knew. There is a surviving letter from a baker's apprentice in 1327, sent to a girl who sold onions. "When you touched my wrist, I counted every breath until your fingers left. I have not felt air since." He never signed it, but the parchment was folded into a pressed flower. In the village of Llangollen, a ritual called the still step was practiced by shy couples. Each night they would meet beneath a tree and say nothing, just stand, heartbeats apart, for 7 breaths. If neither stepped away, they would meet again the next night, and the next, until one night the boy brought bread, the girl brought salt, and nothing more needed to be said. Their love, unspoken, was known. In a world full of arranged matches and approved unions, these moments were precious because they belonged to no one else but them.
When the moon rose full above the meadows, the villages came alive with something the church could not control: dancing. Not in ballrooms, but in open fields, on dusty roads, beneath branches heavy with blossoms. Music wasn't written, it was played by ear, on flutes carved by hand, or drums stretched with leather, their rhythm shaped by heartbeats and the shifting of stars. These were not grand festivals, they were twilight gatherings. Girls wore flowers in their hair, boys came with dirt on their boots and hope in their sleeves. And when they danced, they rarely spoke. Touch was enough. A hand at the waist, a palm brushing a shoulder, a pause just before the turn where two people looked at each other and forgot the world. In the village of Belvoir, a song was passed down for generations, sung only at such dances. It had no words, just a rising hum that mimicked the hush of wind through wheat. It was said that couples who matched that rhythm would never drift apart. One chronicler from 1382 wrote, "I have seen more truth in a single moonlit step than in 10 marriages blessed by Rome." In these dances, love wasn't loud or lewd, it was a shared gravity, pulling two people, step by step, breath by breath, into a space neither had known before. And when the music faded and the crowd thinned, some walked home alone, but others lingered, sat on fences, shared fruit, looked at hands, then eyes, then sky. That was courtship too, the kind no priest could sanctify, but no heart could forget.
There were times when love had to stay hidden, not because it was shameful, but because it was too sacred to survive the world's noise. In the corners of thatched barns or in the stillness of forest edges, two hands would meet, not for sin, but for solace. There was no parchment to sign, no bishop to approve, only eyes that held too long, and a silence that said, "I see you." In many regions, lovers made secret oaths at night. They would touch foreheads and whisper their names, not full names, but the ones only their mothers or oldest friends used. This was intimacy before touch, a confession without words. In an obscure Welsh manuscript from 1274, there's a faded line scrawled in the margins. "She gave me her breath, I gave her mine. We are now made of each other." No seal, no ink, but the writer added a pressed sprig of thyme inside the page, and that became the vow. In Saxony, it was said that if two people shared a dream on the same night, they were bound by fate, no matter who their fathers chose. Old women in mountain villages taught young girls to sleep with bay leaves under their pillows, believing it would bring the dream of their true one. One tale tells of a girl who dreamt of a boy with a red scarf. She awoke weeping because she had seen him only once at the winter fair. But the next year he returned, and without speaking, he handed her the scarf. Some things could not be planned, not written, not approved, but they were still real, and sometimes realer than law.
Not all weddings had bells. Not all vows were spoken aloud. In the quiet edge of every village, there lived those who loved without permission. Their homes were made of wood, and rosemary, of shared spoons and silence. There were no records of their names, no ink on parchment, no stained glass to catch their shadows, and yet those were the unions that often lasted the longest. A woman who slept beside a man every night, yet never called him husband. A man who carved her name into every beam of the cottage, though the church never blessed their bed. Theirs was a love built not on ceremony, but on presence, on the way he brought her wild plums from the forest, on the way she lit the fire before his hands grew cold, on the mornings they forgot to speak, but remembered to stay. When he died, she didn't cry at the altar. She folded his shirt with lavender, placed it beneath her pillow, and whispered, "This is where you sleep now." That was her farewell, and the world never knew it happened. No bell tolled, no cross was raised, but the wind remembered it. The sparrows carried it, and the time that grew by their door grew stronger, year after year. For love, even without approval, had roots, and sometimes the roots dug deeper than law. Yet even in such silent, tender unions, the breath of shame was never far. A glance that lingered too long, a neighbor who gossiped, a priest who asked too many questions, and then a booth, a screen, a dark corner behind a church wall, where love was not cherished but judged, where desire had to be confessed and forgiveness wore robes. What happened when love stepped into the shadows? What did they whisper in the dark, kneeling not beside a lover, but behind curtain of fear? That is where the next chapter begins.
The door did not creak. It sighed, the kind of sound only wood makes when it has heard too much. It was the same door in every village church, small, dark, polished by centuries of fingertips that trembled as they entered. Behind it was a booth, not grand, not gilded, but shaped like a question. A wooden box split in two, with a thin screen between voices. One side held a man in robes, the other held everything else. A girl who kissed someone behind the bakery, a widow who still dreamed of her neighbor, a boy who watched too closely when the harvest dancers spun. This booth was not made for judgment, they said, only for mercy. But mercy had rules, it had lists, and some desires never made it off the list. In dusty confessionals across Europe, priests kept small books, not scripture, but catalogues, lists of acts deemed unnatural, some so vague they could include a look, others so detailed they became obsessions. In 1231, a Benedictine monk wrote, "I have memorized over 200 forms of sin, and yet I forget the shape of love." Those who entered the booth came not to speak, but to shrink. They folded their shame into whispers, offered like broken feathers. And the screen caught it all. It never answered, but it never forgot. In the silence that followed confession, there was no embrace, only a list of prayers to recite, and sometimes a punishment, not of the soul, but of the body. For the church believed that to control desire, one must bruise it.
Some didn't know what they had done wrong. They entered the booth with nothing but confusion, and left with shame they didn't carry in. A young man who woke from a dream, heart racing, sheets twisted. A woman who found herself smiling when another voice said her name. These were not actions, they were feelings. But in the doctrine of the day, feelings could be sins if they sparked outside the lines. In Spain, a record from 1304 details a girl of 16 who confessed that her heart beat too loud when a widow brushed her cheek. She was told to fast for 7 days and pray with her arms outstretched until her arms trembled. A century later, another woman confessed not her desire, but her silence. She had known of 2 lovers in her village, and she had said nothing. Her punishment was to carry stones, one for each day she kept the secret. Sometimes it wasn't what you did, it was what you felt, what you failed to deny. The church believed that even longing had to be named, cleansed, corrected. But the heart doesn't speak Latin, and the body doesn't kneel in perfect grammar. It pulses, it aches, it remembers touch. So those who couldn't suppress it learned to reshape it. Love became apology, desire became discipline, and the booth, small and wooden, became the place where innocence was not lost, but rewritten. Deep in abbeys and monasteries, hidden behind doors no woman could enter, there were books. Thin, handwritten, dog-eared by use. They weren't Bibles, they were penitentials, manuals of sin. Each page a ledger of what could be done, what shouldn't be done, and how much to punish for it. Lustful thought while alone, 6 days of fasting. Mutual pleasure without intention to conceive, 10 lashes. Desire toward an unmarried person, 12 Ave Marias barefoot in winter. Some priests memorized these lists like poems. Others rewrote them, adding punishments of their own invention. One 14th century entry reads, "A woman who dreams too vividly of a man must drink bitter wine steeped with ashes." These rules stretched further than reason, longer than mercy, and often deeper than truth. One friar once asked, "Why are there more pages for sin than for grace?" No one answered, because punishment was easier to list. It had shape, structure, it could be copied. But grace had no measure. It arrived quietly. It forgave without logic. It loved without list. And so, in a world obsessed with mapping fault, forgiveness became the only thing too sacred to record. Which is why, perhaps, those who needed it most found it not in the booth, but in the arms of someone who never asked for lists.
There were those who entered the booth with no words left, not because they refused to speak, but because they had already said it all, to the night, to the walls, to the aching within their chest. Some cried before kneeling, others trembled when they saw the shape of the screen, like a lattice that could never truly hide. These weren't sinners in search of pardon. They were souls looking for release, not from punishment, but from silence. A fisherman's wife in Normandy, unable to bear children, once knelt and confessed that she had begun talking to the wind each morning, asking it for a child. She was told it was foolish, that only God listens. But she whispered back, "Then why does the wind reply?" Her punishment was 30 days without speaking. When she returned, she had forgotten the sound of her own voice. In Milan, a young novice confessed to loving another boy in the choir. He wasn't punished, he was sent away. His absence was the sentence, his silence the cost. Confession, they said, was meant to cleanse, but sometimes it only hollowed. It emptied the heart to make space, not for grace, but for guilt. And those who endured it the longest began to believe they deserved less joy, less warmth, less touch, until one day they no longer confessed to sin, but to feeling. They knelt not in repentance, but in surrender, not to God, but to shame. And from that moment on, they stopped looking up at stained glass. They began looking down at their hands, their wrists, their own breath, wondering what had ever made them wrong in the first place.
But not every whisper in the booth was about guilt. Sometimes it was love looking for a place to be heard. A woman once entered the confessional holding a piece of cloth in her palm. She said nothing, only opened her hand. Inside, a scrap of embroidery, 2 initials woven in green and gold. She did not name the man, she did not describe the sin. She only said, "I had nowhere else to carry him." The priest, uncertain, told her to burn it, but when she left the booth, the cloth was still in her hand. And that too was confession, not of crime, but of memory, not of wrong, but of tenderness. In the shadows of the church, where voices were often hushed and judged, some came not to beg for mercy, but to preserve love. A letter tucked in a boot, a lock of hair sewn into a hem, a pebble held from the stream where 2 people kissed and laughed and almost forgot the rules. These were the secret codes of hearts that refused to be silenced. Tokens of love passed hand to hand, hidden in sleeves and bread and books. Not all of them survived, but some did, pressed in pages, buried in gardens, folded into prayers. The booth may have tried to take love apart, but outside, in fields and kitchens and markets, people found ways to keep it whole, quietly, boldly, without permission. And somewhere in the fold of a letter, in the hem of a sleeve, in the shade of green thread stitched too carefully, love kept speaking. Not with voices, but with symbols no punishment could erase.
Before love was declared in ink, it was sewn into fabric. A handkerchief, a sleeve, a wedding sheet. In villages where parchment was rare and privacy rarer, women stitched what they could not say. Each thread became a whisper. Green thread for hope, blue for loyalty, black for sorrow, and sometimes red for nights that had no witnesses. These symbols were not universal. They were personal, passed in looks and gestures, in fingers brushing cloth. A girl might embroider a single flower on the corner of a man's scarf, not to be pretty, but to say, "I remember the night you carried water for my mother," and he would know.
In some regions, lovers made entire languages from thread. A knot at the bottom of a tunic could mean, "Wait for me." 3 roses stitched near the hem might say, "I still dream of you." In 1352, a nobleman's diary recorded his confusion when a serving girl returned his handkerchief with a small white rabbit sewn beside the edge. He asked his sister what it meant. She laughed and said, "It means she thinks you're too fast." Sometimes, thread could wound more cleverly than words, but mostly it protected what the tongue dared not risk. Embroidery became a diary hidden in daylight. You could wear it without shame, fold it into bread, sew it into a pillow. And long after the lover had gone, the message stayed, woven, waiting, still warm to the touch.
In an age before locks could be snapped by photos, love was carried in strands of hair, tied with ribbon, pressed in prayer books, hidden in lockets carved from bone or walnut shell. Hair didn't fade, it curled with time, darkened, and held the scent of where it came from. Lavender fields, smoke from the hearth, oil rubbed into the scalp by a mother's hand. To give someone your hair was not decoration, it was permission. In Florence, a woman once cut a single curl and wrapped it in silk. She left it inside a man's glove without a note. He wore it for 20 years. In Wales, a boy was said to have braided a strand of his beloved's hair into the collar of his tunic before battle. He returned wearing it still, but gray with ash. The strand remained black. And in a convent near Rouen, a nun's journal from 1407 described how she buried a bundle of red gold hair beneath the floor of the chapel. I could not love him with voice, so I gave him what could last. These tokens were never loud, never proud, but they endured, passed through generations, sewn into hems, hidden in boxes meant to be opened by no one, not because they were shameful, but because they were sacred.
When words were too dangerous to write and too fragile to speak, lovers hid poetry in bread. Not the big loaves set on tables, but small ones, round, soft, wrapped in cloth and meant for a single pair of hands. Inside, slipped between the layers or baked into hollowed crusts, were scraps of parchment, a line of verse, a promise, a memory disguised as a rhyme. In Prague, a baker's daughter was known for sending rolls to the boy who worked the bell tower. Each one held a line. I hear your silence. The flower on your fingers is holy. My hands know your name. One day, the roll stopped, and he climbed down barefoot, carrying the last one to the priest, who read it and said only, "You should not have known each other." In the south of France, it was common for women to give small loaves during Lent with poems tucked inside, disguised as prayers. Some survived. One such piece reads, "Though I fast, I hunger for the sound of you." In a world where books were chained to walls and kisses could cost you penance, bread became the library of longing. And even when eaten, its words remained.
In tapestries and tunics, in scarves and stained glass windows, color spoke before words did.
Medieval lovers learned the meanings that no one dared teach aloud. Green meant new love, blue meant fidelity, yellow, jealousy, and violet, that was for longing that never found a name. In court, a woman might wear a ribbon of blue at the wrist and be seen as simply fashionable, but to the man who gave it, it said, "I remember." In some towns, red was forbidden on feast days, not for vanity, but because it stirred the imagination. A red thread sewn into a sleeve might be a promise. A red bead in a rosary could be rebellion. In 1376, a priest in Cologne wrote, "The devil hides in scarlet." But another scribe replied, "So does the heart." Children learn these meanings from lullabies. Women stitched them into shawls. Men wore them under armor. And when two people passed in the market and both wore green, no one else needed to know. Only they understood the storm beneath the surface.
There were times when love crossed boundaries, not just of class, but of language, faith, and law. A crusader who met a healer in Jerusalem. A monk who passed letters to a scholar's daughter through the folds of Scripture. Their words could not be spoken, not in Latin, not in Greek, not in any tongue approved by crown or cross, so they invented one. A lock of hair tied to a date seed, a ribbon twisted into 7 loops, a note folded 6 times, each fold meaning wait, 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 yes. Love in these spaces became a code no priest could read. It was not against God, it simply refused to forget the human. And in the folds of cloth, in hems, in lockets hidden inside boots, this new language bloomed, not on the tongue, but through texture, scent, and silence. What they couldn't say with breath, they embroidered into sleep. What they dared not admit in daylight, they steeped into tea or wore under the skin. But even love whispered in secret left traces on the body. A pulse quickened by a passing glance, a fever that had no name, a breath caught, not from fear, but memory. And so, in time, when the church struggled to explain such ache, it turned to another power, medicine. The body, they said, could be cured. But was it sick because it longed, or was longing just another way the soul reached out? Some said rosemary could still the heat. Others offered wine stirred with pearls or oils from distant lands. And soon, love, once sacred, once poetic, once forbidden, was brought to the table of physicians, to be examined, measured, treated. Thus began a new chapter, where passion left the shadows of cloth and entered the light of science. Whether healed or misunderstood, it would never again be untouched. And so now we follow love one step further, not into chapels or bedrooms, but into the quiet rooms of medieval healers, where herbs simmered and pulses betrayed what lips refused to tell.
Before the physician asked your name, he checked your pulse. In medieval medicine, the body spoke first. A flutter in the wrist, a warmth behind the eyes, a restlessness in sleep. These were symptoms not just of illness, but of desire. And in a world where love was often censored, the body betrayed what the lips refused to say. A young woman who tossed through the night, unable to rest, might be diagnosed with heat of the womb. A man who sighed too deeply when alone could be marked as suffering from melancholy of the blood. And though neither mentioned love, the diagnosis almost always led back to longing. In Paris, a medical manuscript from the 1300s listed signs of secret passion: sudden laughter, shyness around food, unexplained fevers, and, most mysteriously, a gaze that forgets the world. Physicians were taught to observe silently, but some wrote poems in the margins of anatomy books describing patients not as cases, but as stories. One scribbled, "She did not speak of the man, but her skin did. It warmed when I said his name." They did not have our words, no terms like psychosomatic or trauma response, so they called it what they understood: imbalance, fire in the blood, wind in the belly, and sometimes simply love sickness.
The line between remedy and ritual was never clear. A fevered lover might be given mint steeped in goat milk. A restless wife, rose petals soaked in rainwater and whispered over by nuns. But more often, the treatments said less about healing and more about control. One popular cure for romantic distraction was wine infused with crushed pearls, said to cool the blood and silence the pulse. Another involved saffron boiled with vinegar and served with ash from olive branches. Love, they said, was a flame, so every cure tried to dampen it. In Venice, a physician wrote, "Where desire blooms too brightly, we must shade it like a window left too long in sun." But in doing so, they dimmed more than lust. They dimmed joy, laughter, the simple ache of missing someone who once looked back. There were even cases where young girls were sent to sweat houses, steam-filled rooms lined with rosemary and valerian to purge the heat of fantasy. It rarely worked. The girls returned quieter, paler, but the dreams remained. In Prague, a baker's apprentice was ordered to chew pine resin every morning for a month, not for her teeth, but to make her forget the boy who kissed her in the alley. She wrote later in a torn recipe book, "It burned my mouth, but not as much as forgetting him." Medicine in those days did not always understand that longing was not a wound to stitch, but a garden to water. There were times when a physician stared at a patient and saw no wound, no fever, no blemish, and yet something was wrong. A merchant who could not eat, a nun who slept through morning bells, a child who flinched when touched. These were the illnesses that lived in the soul, not the skin. And yet, in the absence of language for sorrow or longing, they were folded into the realm of the body, diagnosed as humoral imbalance, treated with smoke, stones, fasting, or silence. One woman in Bruges, widowed at 23, returned to the healer's hut every month, saying her heart beat too loud. She was told to carry a bag of salt on her chest. When it didn't work, they replaced it with nettles. When that failed, they called it hysteria. But she wrote only one line in her journal: "It is not my heart that pounds, it is memory knocking." The body became a battlefield between silence and meaning, and those who carried love without permission became prisoners of strange remedies. In Milan,
A man who painted icons was given bitter herbs after he carved the Virgin's face to resemble a woman he once loved. The church said it was blasphemy. The doctor called it possession. But maybe it was just grief trying to remember beauty. So often, these diagnoses said less about the patient and more about the fear of those observing them. Love made the world uncomfortable, so they gave it another name and another, until even the patient forgot what it really was.
Not all healing came in bottles. Some came in listening. A physician who sat with the widow and asked not where it hurt, but when it began. A midwife who touched a girl's wrist and said, "You miss someone," instead of, "You are ill." These healers were rare and sometimes feared because they saw what others would rather bury. They understood that a sleepless night could be grief, not imbalance, that silence could be a scream too big for the throat. In the hills of Tuscany, there was once an apothecary who never gave medicine on the first visit. She brewed tea. She let people speak. She said healing began when someone finally said the name they'd been swallowing for years. Her records, recovered centuries later, are filled not with symptoms, but with names. Luca, Emanuela, Thomas, Aline, and one note in red ink. She said his name, and then she slept. These were not cures, they were releases. And though the church disapproved of such tenderness, they could not outlaw it, because deep down, even confession feared what love could do when left unburied. So healing remained in whispered names, in warmth shared without question, in hands held with no request. Sometimes that was the only medicine that worked.
In the end, the physicians did not always understand what they touched, but they recorded it. The way a heartbeat shifted when a name was spoken. The way tears came not from pain, but remembering. And between herbs and heat, between ointments and oils, they documented something more enduring than any wound. Longing. It beat under every diagnosis. It colored every cure. And though they tried to treat it, to tame it, love proved itself untamable. It bled through linen. It curled into steam. It lived in the space between pulse and silence. And when it could not be healed, it found other places to go. Some carried it into marriage, others into memory, but some carried it behind convent walls, where love had no name, but still knocked on the doors of sleep. And so we follow it, into veils and candlelight, into locked gardens and corridors of hush, into a place where vows were whispered at midnight, and footsteps meant everything, where some women learned to pray, and others learned to escape. That place, hidden behind holy walls, awaits us next. So the story does not end here, but slips, like a shadow through stone, into another silence, one with veils, with prayers not always meant for God, and doors that never quite closed.
In the hushed corridors of stone and candlelight, the convent seemed like a world sealed away. A sanctuary, they called it, a fortress against temptation.
But to those who lived within, it was a world of soft rebellions. The bells marked time, yes, but not every hour was prayer. Behind carved doors and embroidered veils, a different rhythm pulsed, one of longing, of memories smuggled in like contraband. The novices, heads bowed in quiet devotion, often carried more than rosaries in their sleeves. A pressed flower from a lover's field, a page from a book not sanctioned by the church, a ribbon once tied around a letter that should never have been written. These were not acts of disobedience, they were acts of remembering. For some women, the convent was a refuge, but for others it was exile dressed in white linen. There were stories, rarely told aloud, of mothers weeping as daughters vanished behind the cloister gate, of girls who once danced under moonlight, now taught to speak only in hymns, and sometimes at night the silence hummed too loudly. In a small convent near Siena, a 14th century letter was once found hidden in the spine of a hymnal, its ink faded, but its voice intact. I do not regret God. I only regret not saying goodbye. The writer was never named. Her voice disappeared into the chant of centuries. But she was not alone. Her words echoed in the hearts of those who, even cloistered, remembered the world outside and sometimes desired it.
Some secrets were too soft for parchment. They lived in thread, in glances, in candle smoke. But when the heart could no longer hold them, some women wrote. Their words, hidden in hymnals or beneath the false bottoms of prayer boxes, told stories that no sermon dared repeat. In a convent near Rouen, one letter, never sent, was written in Latin and smudged with tears. My body is here, cloaked in linen, but my breath returns each night to your name. The woman signed only an initial, and then burned the corner. Many wrote not to defy God, but to preserve a part of themselves the convent tried to erase. In love, they felt human again. In silence, they risked forgetting who that human had been. There were codes, colors of ribbon, the number of knots in a braid, the tilt of a candle before sleep. A blue ribbon tied twice meant, I dream of you. A red knot at the end of a sleeve whispered, I am still yours. Some letters never used words. A feather wrapped in lavender, a dried fig in a silk pouch. These tokens held weight no prayer could lift. Not all nuns disobeyed, but those who did loved in ways that cost them nothing less than memory and sometimes their names.
Love, when denied words, finds its way in footsteps. And in certain convents, those footsteps echoed at night, soft, deliberate, barefoot. There were rumors of tunnels dug beneath ancient kitchens, walls that swung open behind frescoes, and trapdoors beneath the altar rug. Some believed they were old escape routes from times of war. Others whispered of rendezvous, clandestine, fleeting, but remembered. In a convent near Ghent, the worn stone near a window told its own tale. A sill polished smooth by elbows resting night after night. A place to watch, to hope, to wait for a candle's flicker from the forest's edge. Not all who escaped fled the faith. Some returned before dawn, veils retied, prayers whispered with cracked voices. But in their eyes something remained undone, a wildness that the bells could not ring away, a freedom felt only in the breath between two cloisters. And sometimes that breath was enough. Some secrets arrived crying. In the hidden corners of cloistered gardens or candlelit infirmaries, children were born, not with celebration, but with silence. They were wrapped in linens, not blankets, and named only in whispers, if named at all. Some were spirited away before dawn, given to wet nurses in nearby villages. Others remained for a while, their existence an open secret passed between glances. The church had words for them, sin, shame, scandal, but the women who held them had only lullabies. One nun in Barcelona wrote in her hidden journal, "He was never baptized, but he smiled when I hummed." That line, more than doctrine, told a truth too human for judgment. These children, born from forbidden longing, were not miracles, but they were not mistakes either. They were moments made flesh, and even if forgotten by the world, they were remembered in the touch of the hands that held them. Love, in its quietest form, left traces not even Scripture could erase.
There comes a point when even stone weeps. The convent walls, once proud and silent, began to listen. To the footsteps, to the sighs, to the names never said aloud. And in that listening, something shifted. A tenderness bloomed in the cracks. These walls, meant to contain devotion, ended up recording desire, not as rebellion, but as memory, as proof that even within sanctity, longing had a voice. And that voice echoed not just in sin, but in songs, in stitching, in the scent of lavender where no garden grew. Some stories were never written, but they live in the folds of veils, in the softened sandals of women who walked the same hallway for decades. And when they finally stepped outside, some old, some shaking, some smiling, they carried with them not just silence, but the whole weight of having once felt too deeply. What they left behind was not empty space, but air, charged with stories. And just down the hill, beyond the forest path, the city began to flicker with another kind of light. Not candlelight, but lanterns hung outside doors that never judged. And in those rooms, a different kind of woman waited, not cloistered, but watched, not silenced, but sung about.
As the moon climbed over medieval rooftops, another kind of light began to glow, one not blessed but permitted. In the corners of cities where churches fell silent, there were doors marked not with crosses but red cloth. These were the stews, licensed brothels, regulated sin. And while the convents held prayers for the soul, these places offered comfort for the flesh. The line between them was not as sharp as one might hope. In London, Paris, and Florence, city records show that the same magistrates who punished public indecency also approved the names of women allowed to work in the stews. Some were widows, some were orphans, some were sent there by family, debts, or silence. But once inside, they were not just survivors. They became storytellers. The women of the stews knew how to listen, how to touch not just the body, but the memory that clung to it. And men came not only for pleasure, but to forget wars, wounds, and wives who never smiled. Rules were posted, prices, hours, hygiene. But behind those rules was something older, an understanding that even in darkness, connection was still a need. In a ledger from Bruges, a lion reads, "Paid 3 florins, not for the night, but for the way she said my name." That, too, was a kind of healing. Every stew had a register, sometimes called the Book of Warm Names. Inside were the names of women who worked, not with titles, but with symbols. The Dove, Mistress of Lace, Red Anna, or simply the One Who Waits. The women chose their own names, sometimes from longing, sometimes from pain. They wore bells on their ankles, not for music, but as a warning, so no man could pretend he didn't know. And yet many returned, again and again. These women memorized the stories of those who visited, a soldier with hands too soft for battle, a poet who could recite but never write, a merchant who paid double just to weep in silence. The stews were not just buildings, they were theaters, confessionals, temples. But no relics were kept, no saints were named, only the echo of first names spoken softly. And sometimes between the sheets, someone whispered their real name, just once.
The stew may have been sanctioned, but it was not sacred. And when rules were broken, the walls remembered. Licenses came with laws. No woman under 20, no service on holy days, no acts during Lent. But need has always known how to slip between the cracks of virtue. Girls lied about their age. Some painted their teeth to look older. Others carried forged tokens, badges made of wax and string to prove non-existent approval. In Paris, one official lamented that the stews employed women barely grown from girlhood, veiled in rouge and shame. And yet, these same women knew more about survival than most scribes or priests. They paid fines with money earned through whispers. They memorized the guards' patterns. They hid forbidden books under floorboards, books not about sin, but about love that refused to kneel. In Avignon, there was one stew called La Pomme Bleue. It was rumored that once a nobleman's daughter worked there in secret, her face always behind a thin veil. When the veil slipped, a client saw the crest of her family stitched into her underskirt. She never returned, but the story did. It lingered like perfume in stairwells and became part of the place's silence. When the church sent inspectors, the women were lined up like livestock, eyes downcast, hands folded. But even then, they exchanged glances, small flickers of defiance between the lashes. Punishment came swift, a broken license, a public branding, a trip to the so-called House of Repentance, where starvation was scripture and isolation a rite. Yet even there they scratched poems into the bed frames. One remains in a museum today, carved in tiny letters. If you read this, remember I was more than what they called me.
Not every woman in the stew came there by desperation. Some came by choice, others by cleverness. There was a certain economy in beauty, and for a time the stews offered something few other places did, a measure of control. While laborers broke their backs and noblewomen bowed to arranged marriages, a woman behind a beaded curtain could choose who entered, what price they paid, and what words were allowed to linger. They curated not just their bodies, but entire identities. One day a noble widow, the next a foreign dancer with tales from Moorish lands. They practiced accents, learned bits of Latin and poetry, and embroidered lies into silk robes. The stews became little theaters of the possible. And the women? Actresses, directors, and sometimes even playwrights of their own fate. But freedom was rarely whole. Behind each locked door was a ledger. Behind each transaction, a risk. There was diseases no physician understood. Pregnancies ended in silence. Clients who blurred the line between pleasure and pain. Some women vanished, taken by illness, vengeance, or the authorities. Others lasted years, accumulating enough coin to leave and start anew, perhaps as innkeepers or spice sellers. And some simply stayed. One document from Bruges, dated 1371, recorded a woman known only as B. She'd lived in the same room for 27 years. The notes beside her name read, "No complaints, no crimes, 3 cats, curtains always red." But perhaps the most haunting trace came not from records, but from a wall. In a cellar beneath a London stew, archaeologists found a mural, faded, almost lost. It showed a woman standing alone, holding a mask in one hand, a rose in the other. Beneath her feet, a scroll, unfurled, with words barely visible. "We are not what they believe, but we are not lies either."
If the stews taught anything, it was this: that love, lust, power, and pain all wore the same perfume. They mingled, they blurred, and those who lived within that scent learned how to breathe without drowning. The brothel was never just a building. It was a boundary between law and lawlessness, between virtue and survival, between the woman who waited in the square and the one who watched from behind a curtain. The records may speak of fines and licenses, but what they leave unsaid is louder. The resilience of those whose names were never written, but whose lives shaped the very heart of medieval city nights. And it is in the hush after the closing of a door, in the soft rustle of a coin exchanged, or the gentle thud of footsteps fading down a narrow stair, that we hear a new kind of poetry. One not sung by minstrels in courts, but murmured by those who never sat on thrones and never needed to. It is this rhythm that now carries us from alleyway to palace, from stews to salons, to a world where lute songs echo with longing and armor gleams in candlelight, where romance was not always noble and nobility not always kind, where desire climbed balconies and reality often shut the window. We are not leaving the night behind, only stepping into another shade of it, one perfumed not with musk, but with metaphors, one where verses replaced veils, and love wore a troubadour's cloak.
When the troubadours began to sing, it wasn't just music that filled the castle halls. It was yearning draped in metaphor. They sang of unattainable ladies, of knights who pined from afar,
of glances across banquet tables that burned more than any battle wound. But beneath each lute string and rhyme was a carefully woven illusion. Courtly love, they called it, love that was chaste, distant, elevating. But the truth often rode alongside desire like a shadow on horseback. In the courts of Aquitaine and Provence, noble women were praised in verse while being bartered in marriage contracts. Poets wrote of their grace while priests reminded them of sin. The lady on the balcony rarely had a voice in the story told about her. Her beauty inspired sonnets, but her choices were bound in silk and politics. One tale from 12th century Toulouse tells of a knight who composed a song each night for a married countess. He never touched her hand, but one morning her husband found the lyrics sewn into her sleeve. The knight vanished soon after, some say to war, others say to the river. Love in courtly form was often dangerous, not because of what it allowed, but because of what it denied. Desire unfulfilled became a virtue. Restraint was called passion. A knight could die for love, but not live in it. And the lady, she could listen, smile, weep into her pillow, but she could not descend the stairs. Courtly love carved altars from distance and offered no comfort in return.
In castles lit by candlelight and corridors echoing with Latin prayers, a new kind of literature thrived, where longing was a language and silence was an offering. Courtly poems followed rules as strict as any monastery. The beloved was always distant, the lover always tormented. Love was not consummated, it was contemplated, and yet it spread like fire across parchment. In one preserved manuscript from 13th century Lombardy, a knight writes of a woman he has only seen once, her veil fluttering in the chapel breeze. He writes of her as if she were heaven itself, though he dares not utter her name. This was not love built on shared memories, but on idealization so pure it was nearly imaginary. But the very structure of these poems reveals a quiet resistance. Every rhyme that hints at yearning, every line that veils a kiss is an act of rebellion in a society that demanded restraint. Some troubadours smuggled desire beneath religious metaphors, comparing their lady to the Virgin, their passion to divine grace. Others broke the mold entirely. The female poet Comtessa de Dia wrote of betrayal, fury, and want, not from behind a veil, but with a voice that demanded to be heard. Courtly love, as sung and written, wasn't just about repression. It was a stage where emotions censored in life were safely performed in verse. In the courtly world, love was never shouted. It was signaled in silence. A dropped glove, if left uncollected, was a dismissal. If picked up and kissed, a declaration. A ribbon tied around a lance might mean devotion or mockery, depending on who saw it. In these subtle exchanges, a simple gesture could hold more weight than a letter sealed with wax. But the games were rarely equal. For women of noble birth, every move was watched, every glance interpreted. They were expected to inspire love, not to act on it. In one 14th century account from Avignon, a young lady was exiled to a distant convent after she was seen placing a single rose beneath a knight's saddle.
No words, just a flower. That alone was enough to imply a love not sanctioned by the court. These rules were both prison and poetry, creating a world where desire lived in symbols because it could not live in truth. Yet those symbols over time became powerful. They birthed a language of love more enduring than many marriages. Troubadours collected them like relics, passing on meanings through songs that outlived kingdoms. There was the glance over the shoulder, the turning of a ring, the silence before a toast, all carried messages for those who knew how to read them. And though the world outside the court might have dismissed these games as foolish, those inside knew better. For them, it was not merely flirtation, it was survival. To be desired but not damned. To play with fire but never be seen as burned. That was the game, and not everyone won.
To be the object of courtly love was, in theory, a high honor. The lady became muse, angel, queen of the poet's inner world. But in practice, the pedestal was a lonely place. Nobility expected women to remain pure symbols, desired but distant, praised but not touched. And the greater the song, the tighter the chains. Some women learned to wield this role with grace and cunning, shaping reputation as carefully as embroidery. Others chafed beneath it. In a rare diary fragment from Eleanor of Brittany, a noblewoman writes, "They say I am virtue in silk, but I am longing in flesh." Her words were never meant for public ears. Perhaps that is why they survived. Beneath the layers of poetry, there was another story of women who laughed when they weren't supposed to, who fell in love with squires instead of lords, who sometimes took the lute and sang back. Yet courtly love did not forgive deviation. When a lady became too real, too human, she risked being cast down from her imagined throne. One tale from the court of Castile tells of a duchess whose secret affair was discovered not through scandal, but through poetry. A stanza in a troubadour's verse matched a private line from her own embroidery. The thread betrayed her. She was quietly sent to a distant estate and erased from songs entirely. Courtly love elevated longing, but punished fulfillment. It praised passion only if it stayed hidden. It carved statues of women, but feared their warmth. And in that fear, it revealed the fragile lie at its core, that to be loved ideally was not to be known at all.
The stories of courtly love were carved like statues, smooth, idealized, untouchable. But behind every marble figure stood a shadow, long and flickering. The troubadours gave us dreams of knights kneeling and ladies gazing from towers, but they rarely told us what happened when night fell and longing turned restless. A love that could never be touched became sacred. A woman who never descended the stairs became eternal. But outside the castle walls, the world pulsed with lives less polished, less sung about, but no less real. In the flicker of torchlight, far from courtly stages, 2 glances could lead to a lifetime, or just a moment. And sometimes that moment mattered more than 100 rhymed verses. In the end, courtly love gave the world its poetry, but not its truth. The truth was heavier. It lived in silences, in stitched sleeves, in letters burned before dawn. It lived in choices too risky to speak and too human to deny. Perhaps that's why so many noble women wept at the windows, not for the knight they couldn't have, but for the girl they couldn't be. As the lute fades and the candles grow thin, we step away from the tapestries of longing and toward another frontier, one not of fantasy, but of encounter. For while songs of distant ladies filled Europe's courts, something else stirred in the east. Knights who rode to Jerusalem did not return with only relics and wounds. Some brought stories, others brought wives, and a few brought children who bore 2 names, 2 languages, and the silence of a world divided. From deserts scented with myrrh and whispered vows behind veils, the next chapter is not written in sonnets, but in sand.
The Crusades did not only move armies, they moved hearts. When European knights traveled east, they expected conquest and glory, but some found something stranger, belonging. In the markets of Antioch and beneath the palms of Acre, women spoke in languages they did not understand, yet their gestures were poetry. Spices weren't the only things traded. Glances crossed veils. Letters were handed under stars. A Frankish knight from Burgundy once wrote in his journal, "Her perfume, jasmine, I think, clung to my armor longer than blood ever did." These were not the courtly love games of Europe. These were meetings between exiles, between the homesick, between those who had nothing to prove and everything to feel. And when love took root here, it had to grow in silence. A Frankish warrior and a Levantine widow might share a garden before they shared a name. The priest would not bless it. The village might whisper, but still, an orange tree bloomed. To fall in love across cultures was to build a bridge with no blueprint. Faith clashed, customs collided. He kissed her hand, she recoiled, not from disgust, but from ritual. He offered bread, she refused, not out of pride, but because it was not halal. But slowly, gestures became grammar. He learned the word for water. She taught him the word for trust. In Jerusalem, a Latin knight named Allard married the daughter of a Syrian healer. The church excommunicated him. Her family disowned her. But in the desert hills, they built a home of stone and shade. Travelers called it the House of the Two Morns, for he woke with the sun and she with the call to prayer. Their son bore 2 names, and when he grew old, he wrote both languages in his will.
Not all stories had homes. Some only had hopes. Many crusaders never returned, but left behind rumors. A knight who vanished in Damascus, a Saracen woman seen placing flowers by a foreign grave each year. In a Cairo archive, there is a letter, unsent, written in broken Latin and graceful Arabic. It reads, "You were not my enemy. You were my beginning." The signature? A first name burned at the corner. Perhaps it was a servant, a lover, a ghost. But it was real. Even unwritten love finds parchment in memory. But there's more to this parchment than poetry. In 1273, a young scribe named Elias from Marseille recorded a tale passed on by pilgrims. It told of a knight named Raymond who disappeared after the siege of Kerak. Rumors said he was taken captive. Others claimed he walked willingly into the desert night. Months later, a Bedouin tribe spoke of a foreign man who taught their children to read, who prayed facing no direction, and who never spoke of his past except to whisper a name before sleep. Centuries later, a fragment of his tunic was found in a ruin near Petra. Sewn inside, a lock of red hair and a verse in Occitan, the love language of the troubadours. It read, "If exile is my price, may your memory be my homeland."
In the courtyards of Tyre, Acre, and Tripoli, midday shadows gathered beneath pomegranate trees, where children of mixed blood chased each other in circles that had no edges. Their mothers called to them in Arabic lullabies sweetened with the soft consonants of Occitan. Their fathers, armored giants returned from patrol, tossed them dates and laughed in French or Lombard or German. These children belonged to two horizons at once. They had inherited the pale eyes of the north and the sun-burnished skin of the Levant, the iron discipline of Crusader encampments, and the fluid courtesy of desert hospitality. To the Latin priests who kept sparse records, they were nota pigra, scribbles in margins, reminders of sin and disorder. But to the spice merchants, they were walking ledgers of future trade, fluent in more dialects than any diplomat. A boy nicknamed Yusuf Jean could recite the Our Father and the opening verses of the Quran. A girl called Isabel al-Kamar braided her hair in the shape of both a Crusader's cross and a crescent moon. They grew up tasting honey cakes at Easter and sharing sweets at Eid, learning that calendars could overlap like hands clasped in secret. Yet their very existence forced every adult around them to redraw invisible borders. A Frankish knight learned to remove his mailed gloves before greeting his mother-in-law. An imam discovered he could listen without flinching to the clang of church bells because his grandson's laughter followed after. In schoolrooms improvised beneath colonnades, these children mapped constellations that had names in both Latin and Arabic, Orion and Al-Jabbar, and they argued which name was taller in the night. At weddings they would attend later, they invented hand signs that translated vows no priest or Qadi was willing to sanction. And when plague or battle stole one language from their households, they served as memory, reciting lost words so that grief could hear itself and heal. Scholars in Europe would one day call them Hebribe with scholarly disdain, while chroniclers in Damascus would curse them as Hult, a troubling mixture. But the children themselves preferred the simpler title Lailali, the Nights, because all stars belonged to them. One such child, grown tall and weary, became a caravan guide named Marcos ibn Malik. He carved a poem on the lintel of a caravanserai near Homs. I walk on two roads, but the dust on my feet is the same. Travelers rubbed the carving for luck, smudging the letters into legend. Thus, the children of two skies carved doorways where no door had existed, and through those doorways passed stories too wide for any single homeland.
Empires etched borders on parchment with confident quills, and theologians argued the width of salvation. Yet between inked lines and doctrinal walls, love wandered like a nomad, refusing every corral. In Crusader chronicles, victories are tallied and martyrdoms exalted, but the scribes leave blank the quiet nights when foreign hands met under date palms, or the mornings when a knight lingered to help grind wheat at a village mill because the miller's daughter smiled with her whole face. These omissions are not accidents. They are concessions to a narrative that cannot accommodate tenderness. Still, tenderness survives. It survives in graffiti, where Latin hearts embrace Arabic initials, carved together in ruined chapels beyond Aleppo. It survives in recipes, stewed lamb with rosemary from Provence, married to sumac and pomegranate molasses, handed down to grandchildren who no longer remember which grandparent spoke which language. It survives in lullabies that begin with "Hush, my star," and end with "Sleep, my moon," crossing tongues in the middle like lovers switching hands. And it survives in graves, unmarked but not unmourned, sprinkled with both holy water and desert sand. One evening in 1348, a merchant from Siena, passing through Acre, recorded a scene. Two women, one veiled, one unveiled, stood beside a modest headstone. They prayed in alternating verses, one Latin, one Arabic. When he asked whom they mourned, the unveiled woman said only, "Our bridge." Perhaps it was a husband, a son, or merely the dream that had bound them. The merchant wrote, "I saw a sorrow that belonged to no kingdom and every kingdom." Soon after his journey, plague ships would dock in Messina, carrying death westward faster than any crusader had ridden east. The Black Death would not recognize borders any more than love had. It would slip through loopholes in faith, feast halls, and farmsteads alike, shattering certainties and sewing strangers together in desperate knots of compassion and fear. Secret weddings would multiply as swiftly as burials. Lips would seek comfort beneath masks of linen. Physicians would blame bad air, while priests preached purgation of sin. Yet amid that terror, candles were lit in back rooms, vows whispered over trembling hands, and in some forgotten chapel, the children of two skies would pray for both halves of their blood. That is where our story walks next, into streets washed with ashes and hope, where love hides beneath plague doctor beaks, and belief turns toward miracles.
It began not with a scream, but with silence, the kind of silence that creeps into the corners of marketplaces where laughter once lived. Before the Black Death arrived with its swollen lymph nodes and fevered dreams, it arrived as a rumor, a cough in the wrong alley, a caravan that didn't return, a priest who stopped ringing the morning bell. People whispered before they screamed, and in those whispers the world began to crack, not just at the bone, but at the heart. A young woman in Florence married her lover at dusk, not because she was ready, but because the baker across the street had died that morning. A boy in Avignon kissed his friend for the first time in a garden thick with lavender, not out of courage, but because courage had no more time left to wait. The Black Death did not just kill, it accelerated. Weddings were whispered, confessions made in doorways, touch became urgent, like water in a fire. As monks carried bodies in carts, some hands reached for each other across pews. One woman said, "If death is near, let me die with the taste of love." That wasn't poetry. That was panic turned sacred.
They wore beaks filled with herbs and thought it might save them. The physicians of the plague moved like ghosts, more feared than revered. No one trusted anyone. Bread was bought with eyes lowered. Doors were knocked with sticks, not hands. Lovers feared the very breath of one another. And yet, against this backdrop of paranoia, love didn't die, it mutated. A widow in Liebeck tied red ribbon on her gate every full moon, not as a warning, but as a sign. I'm still here. A former priest, excommunicated for defying burial laws, found refuge in a healer's hut. They never married, they only held hands at dusk. She gave him juniper berries for protection. He gave her silence that felt like prayer. Even beliefs were infected. Some said passion caused plague. Others swore abstinence was the cure. But neither stopped the dying or the desiring. A young couple in York was caught making love behind the chapel. Instead of punishment, they were asked, "Are you afraid?" The boy answered, "Of dying, yes, but more afraid of dying untouched."
When the churches closed their doors and the bells stopped ringing, love didn't pause, it simply learned to whisper. In hamlets where entire families vanished overnight, couples stood before trees instead of priests. Vows were exchanged under constellations rather than stained glass. A blade of grass placed in a lover's hand became a wing, and the wind passing between two trembling voices became the only witness. In one village near Siena, a young man and woman buried their parents on the same day. By nightfall, they stood alone on the chapel steps. No choir, no cross, just a sky smeared with smoke and starlight. She handed him a blue ribbon and said, "I want my name to die on your tongue." He replied, "Then kiss me, and I'll remember it even if I don't survive." These weren't grand romances of epic ballads. These were acts of defiance against death, against time, against the thought that the end should come without love. Sometimes they didn't even kiss. Sometimes they simply lay side by side in abandoned fields, breathing in rhythm, afraid to sleep for fear of waking up alone. And in that space, somewhere between panic and peace, they planted hope. Not forever, just for one more day.
The plague forced people to rewrite morality as much as medicine. Saints were no longer just those who prayed, but also those who stayed. A woman who nursed her neighbor coughing became holier than a bishop in retreat. A baker who gave away his last loaf was canonized in alley whispers. And somewhere between sacred and scandalous, people began to forgive. Young lovers who had once been shunned for kissing before marriage now kissed without shame. Widows and widowers sought comfort in arms not approved by the church. Mothers confessed not sins, but regrets. I should have hugged her more before she fell ill. And with that, even the idea of sin changed. Some began to believe that love, messy, desperate, human, wasn't a sin at all, but a shield. That to die untouched was not purity, but poverty. In the abbey gardens, nuns tended not only to herbs, but to grief. One left wildflowers on the pillow of a dying novice every morning. Another copied love poems in the margins of scripture, as if to say, even here, desire blooms.
The plague took many last breaths, but not all last words. In locked chests, people hid lockets, torn letters, and scraps of unfinished poems.
A childless woman in Barcelona kept a jar of rosewater from her wedding that never happened. A dying monk left behind not a prayer, but a single note. Love was the only thing I didn't fear. And so, in a world that had seemed to forget tenderness, memory refused. The scent of someone's hair, the warmth of a night when everything outside was dying. These weren't erased, they were engraved, in bone, in breath, in the pages we now open. Because history is not just who lived, it's who loved, even when they weren't supposed to. And as the plague loosened its grip and windows opened again to light, another kind of reckoning approached. It came not with coughs, but with questions. Who had sinned? Who had survived? And what did it mean to love freely in a world suddenly obsessed with order? As we step from ash into judgment, we enter a new chapter where passion meets punishment and desire walks beneath the gallows, a place where love didn't die, but often had to hide to stay alive.
In medieval courts, love was not an excuse, it was an accusation. Adultery, though common in whispers and ballads, became deadly when spoken aloud. Laws varied across kingdoms, but the punishment often shared one thing: spectacle. In England, a woman found guilty might be dragged through the streets with shaven head and tarred clothes. In France, a man could lose not only his honor, but his ears. And in smaller towns, the punishment was public shame, a ritual almost theatrical in its cruelty. But not all accusations came from heartbreak. They came from power plays. A husband who owed money might accuse his wife to avoid paying her dowry. A lord who coveted land could smear a rival's sister. The courtroom, supposedly holy, became a stage where truth bowed to manipulation. Inside those stone walls, the accused stood behind iron rails. Witnesses, sometimes bribed with coin or revenge, told tales embroidered with innuendo. The judges, priests or nobles, rarely asked if love existed, only if the sheets were warm. There's a record from Avignon, 1327, where a baker's wife was tried for spending time with a traveling poet. The man swore she only listened to his verses. The court asked, "Why behind shuttered shutters?" She replied, "Because the streets are loud and poetry is quiet." The room laughed. The verdict was not. In a village near Rouen, a widow named Isabeau and a thatcher named Roule were accused of adultery. The charge did not come from a priest or constable, but a jealous neighbor who claimed to hear sighs through a thin wall. The trial, held in a timbered hall with rushes on the floor, became theater. Witnesses spoke of glances at the well, of bread shared too often, of a slipper seen outside the wrong door. Isabeau, veiled in calm, said only one sentence: "Even saints need warmth." The judge, torn between doctrine and doubt, paused. The punishment could be public penance, a pilgrimage, or worse. But then a parchment appeared, an old love letter written by Roule to another woman, not Isabeau. The court fell silent. The judge dismissed the case, not for innocence, but for confusion. Injustice sometimes wears robes of caution.
In Toulouse, a miller's wife stood trial, not for what she did, but for whom she didn't deny. Her name was Almodus. The priests said she confessed to carnal thoughts, but Almodus had no priest. She had a brother-in-law with debts. The accuser was paid in barley. The judge was gifted a goat, and yet the crowd leaned forward, not for justice, but for story. Trials were the only theater some villagers ever saw, and in this one, Almodus wore a blue sash, the color of fidelity. Her silence unnerved them. They expected weeping. She gave them stillness. The verdict? Exiled for a year. But later that summer, she was seen at the feast of St. John, dancing. And beside her, no husband, only a woman in green. Some truths need no judge, only time. The court scribes wrote that Almodus disappeared, but among those who sold herbs by the river, and among women who never wore rings, her name lived on. They called her the blue thread, impossible to cut clean. For what is exile when your gaze still lingers? And what is justice if memory refuses to forget?
In Bruges, a blacksmith named Emmerich was condemned for adultery with a noble's wife. He claimed innocence, love, and fate, but the gallows listened to neither poetry nor pleas. The trial was swift. The woman was sent to a convent. Emmerich, shackled, was marched through the square. A crowd jeered. But as the noose was placed, a parchment fell from his tunic. It was a prayer, signed by her. Forgive what the world calls sin, for it was the only moment I ever felt real. The hangman paused. The judge, pale, ordered a delay. Days passed, rumors spread, and then, in the night, Emmerich vanished from his cell. Some say he bribed a guard. Others say she came in silence with a hood and a dagger. The truth lost, but sometimes even the rope must wait. In the years after, lovers left folded notes in blacksmith shops across Flanders, sealed with wax and fear. They called it the Emmerich Pact, a vow never to let fear drown truth. Not law, not rope, not shame.
In a quiet chapel off the coast of Flanders, a girl named Clara once knelt beneath a fresco of Saint Cecilia. She wasn't praying for forgiveness, she was remembering. Weeks earlier, her name had echoed inside the bishop's court. Her crime? Writing letters, not lewd, not bold, just tender. And to a monk, a young man who sang vespers with trembling hands and read poetry when no one watched. The scribe at the trial noted that the monk wept and renounced her to save himself. But Clara didn't bend. She said, "He never touched me, but he saw me, and that is more dangerous than touch." The court, of course, didn't know what to do with vision. They burned her letters, but one survived, folded between pages of an old psalter, tucked into the spine like a secret spine of its own. Centuries later, a scholar found it while brushing mold from forgotten vellum. The ink was faded, but legible. It read, "In a world that forbids our names, I wrote you mine." It wasn't a confession. It was a declaration, not of guilt, but of self. The bishop who sentenced her is long forgotten. The monk who denied her became abbot, then died of fever. But Clara's letter, unclaimed and unashamed, slipped free from fire and decay. That parchment became legend among women who sewed initials into hems, who brewed love potions in secret, who kissed only in dreams, but remembered every detail. The letter wasn't preserved by power, but by accident, or maybe intention disguised as luck. Either way, it outlived the court. Not all verdicts come from judges. Some are written in the way someone lingers at a door, in the hush before a name is spoken aloud, in the way silence stretches when truth is too precious to name. Medieval law could bind hands, silence lips, exile bodies, but it never truly grasped desire. And so desire slipped between laws like water through cracked stone. It left no witness, but it left roots. As we close this chapter of trials and testimonies, of shame scripted by power, we don't walk away with verdicts. We leave with echoes, the kind that outlive rope and robes and ring only in memory. For justice in the medieval world was not always blind, but it was often deaf. And love heard everything, even the things not said. So now we leave the courts behind. The judges have spoken, the gallows have stilled, the letters, burned or buried, have whispered their final sigh. But what happens when punishment ends and silence begins? We move now into the stillness that followed, to the nights when no bells rang, to the cities where laughter dimmed and even whispers feared being heard, to a time when passion hid in plague masks and love dared to bloom under death's shadow. The ropes are gone, the laws grow moss, but what came after? The hush, the hiding, the desperate hope, that's where we go next.
After the last gallows was taken down, and the whispers of the courtroom faded into dust, Europe entered a hush, not a peace, but a pause. In the late Middle Ages, something strange began to stir, not in the cathedrals or courts, but in ink, in parchment, in the murmur of presses slowly learning to speak. The printing press, crude and miraculous, began to birth words that could not be silenced, and with it came a quiet revolution, one of love, but not love as punishment, as sin, or as scandal. This was love rewritten by poets, by thinkers, by hands that trembled with hope. In the town of Mainz, a boy named Lucas learned his letters not from a priest, but from a printer. Each morning he swept dust from the workshop floor and watched letters rise like bricks in a city of thought. He saw pages pressed with sonnets, not sermons. One poem stayed with him forever. It began, "She is not mine, nor promised, but I remember her like rain." It was unsigned. Maybe it was written by a man who once loved a woman he never touched, or a woman who learned to live without vows, but not without memory. Across Europe, pages bloomed, not only scriptures and laws, but stories, poems that bled tenderness, plays where heroines chose neither convent nor marriage, but solitude, love letters copied not in secret, but in ink that dared permanence. And yet, what changed was not just what was written, but who read it. Bakers, widows, apprentices,
girls named Isolde who dreamed of something beyond lace and lineage. They read Petrarch and Christine de Pizan. They read of lovers who waited not for blessing, but for clarity. They began to question why courtship must end in silence or rope. This wasn't rebellion, it was remembering that before gallows, before judges, before shame, there was gaze and longing, and names whispered like prayers. The bells had fallen silent, yes, but in that silence something else stirred, a gentler defiance, one that did not shout but inscribed, that did not break doors but opened windows, that did not erase memory but gave it form. The world was still cruel, still unequal, but love, once hunted, judged, and hung, had slipped the noose, and now, on paper, it began to live again, not as a scandal, but as a story. And stories, once told, never truly die.
The new age did not arrive with a shout. It arrived with a whisper pressed into pages. While the cities grew louder with trade and towers, love became quieter and deeper. It no longer begged the approval of priests or nobles. It began to speak for itself, in journals hidden in drawers, and margins scribbled with longing. A baker in Bruges wrote of a widow he watched for 3 winters. She stirred her soup like she stirred something in me, he penned. It was never meant to be published. And yet, centuries later, a scrap of that line was found sewn into the lining of an apron, passed down from mother to daughter. That was the miracle of this new world, not just in printing, but in remembering. The ink of this era was not bold. It was patient. It didn't protest loudly. It lingered. It soaked into linen. It hid in embroidery. It waited in songs hummed by washerwomen. Words of love were not always written by the educated. They were whispered by shepherds, etched into tree bark, hummed across valleys. And still, they endured. In Florence, a girl named Elisabetta stitched her feelings into the hem of her sleeve. Each color spoke: blue for fidelity, green for new affection, red for courage. Her mother called it nonsense, but Elisabetta knew. She wasn't just sewing silk, she was telling her truth. No priest could read it, no law could forbid it. And yet a boy named Marco noticed. When he brought bread, he noticed the green thread above her wrist and answered with a ribbon tied around the loaf. That night, neither spoke, but both slept with the knowledge they had been heard. This was how love changed. It no longer needed confessionals. It didn't beg for sanctuary. It made its sanctuary, on linen, in ink, in silence that listened. The humanists may have debated virtue and vice in Latin halls, but in kitchens, gardens, and marketplaces, people wove their own philosophies. Love was not merely endured, it was shaped. And so the bells may have fallen silent, but hearts learned to write in ways no bell could echo, in ways that could not be silenced again.
In the quiet, after centuries of bells and bindings, a softer voice began to emerge, not from pulpits, but from parlors. Love, once encrypted in whispers or stitched into sleeves, now spoke in a new dialect. It was the language of the heart, not in grand declarations, but in deliberate silence, in the ink-stained margins of borrowed books, in the pauses between lines of poetry recited in kitchens, not courts. This was not the love of lords and ladies, sealed by dowries or dictated by bloodlines. It was the love of those who had nothing to trade but glances. The apprentice and the baker's daughter, the widow and the stonemason, the scribe and the seamstress. Letters once reserved for war or church now carried confessions. I looked for you in the rain today. I held your scarf too long. The bread was warm, but not as warm as your silence. These were not sonnets meant for fame, but for presence, for being seen by just one person fully. In the hands of those who'd never read Latin, love was not less sacred, it was more human. Paper became refuge, poems folded into the hems of dresses, initials carved not in trees, but pressed beneath book plates. The act of writing, slow, sacred, became a form of devotion. Each loop of the quill a whisper, each full stop a breath held. Some called it foolish, that words could replace touch, that poetry could protect. But in the years when war returned, when plagues revisited, when borders changed more quickly than seasons, it was the written word that stayed. When lovers parted not by choice, but by draft or distance, their letters outlived even memory. A man in Verona once received a letter from his wife 3 winters after her death. It had traveled by cart, by mistake, through 4 cities. He did not weep. He read it aloud to the fire. Bookshelves now held not just saints and kings, but sighs, regret, hope. In the margins, readers scribbled replies they'd never send. Some pages smelled faintly of lavender, others bore tears that never smeared the ink. Love had become something else, not safer, but more survivable. And in this language, one word returned more than any other. Not passion, not longing, but weight. A word without sound, without heroics. A word that meant, I am here, still, whether you return or not.
In the quiet hours after the candles burned low, there was a thread that wove through centuries, a thread not made of silk or linen, but of longing. This thread ran from monastery margins to city corners, from the hush of cloisters to the bustle of print shops. It stitched together the unseen, the gazes that never touched, the letters never sent, the names never spoken out loud, and it held fast, even when war tore down cathedrals, even when fire swallowed whole libraries, even when generations forgot the names of their great-grandmothers. That thread, finer than breath, stronger than shame, remained. Historians seldom wrote of it. There are no scrolls of devotion between apprentices, no records of glances across bread stalls. But in the pages that did survive, dog-eared, smudged, and sometimes half-burned, there are traces. A marginal note beside a saint's prayer. She smiled today. A pressed violet that has lost its color, but not its meaning. A phrase added in another hand, for when you read this, I will be gone. These weren't grand declarations. They were fragments, but fragments that resisted forgetting. One such fragment was found inside a book donated to a convent in Ghent.
It was a love letter, unfinished. Just 5 lines, written in a trembling hand. I saw you with the candles. I stayed too long in the doorway. I said nothing, but I meant everything. The book had no author's name, no recipient, but the ink was real. The feeling survived, and even as the world around it fell silent, the thread pulled taut again. People began to seek these echoes, not for gossip, but for truth, for proof that love had always existed between the margins, that it had outlived plague and sword, that even in eras of silence, someone had whispered, "I see you." In Paris, a printer compiled a small book titled Letters That Never Found a Home. It sold poorly, but those who read it never forgot it, and some added their own pages, anonymous, heart-worn, brave. Love no longer had to wear a mask of myth. It could be quiet and still be true. It could be brief and still be holy. No longer confined to frescoes or noble poems, it now dwelled in shared books, in borrowed shawls, in the knowing glance between 2 women or 2 men, or any pair whose names history had erased, but whose thread somehow remained. That thread was not loud. It was not carved in marble. It was a whisper between pages, a fold in fabric, a name remembered in dreams, but it never broke.
It didn't end with a wedding, nor a gallows, nor a page turned shut. What we've wandered through, from feathered beds to steamy bathhouses, from silences behind nunneries to secrets stitched into brothel doors, was never just about scandal. It was about remembrance, about how love in every era, in every form, sacred, secret, shattered, left traces, and the most stubborn trace of all was memory. In a small library in Siena, there's a book so worn its cover has turned velvet soft. Inside, pressed between psalms and herbal recipes, is a page scribbled with what seems like a farewell. The words are faded, barely visible, but if you tilt it to the light, you might still read, "If no one remembers us, let the paper do it." That right there is why stories matter, why we trace the gestures of those long gone. Not to romanticize, but to reconnect, to remember that behind every law was a heartbeat, behind every punishment a trembling hand, behind every silence a name too dangerous to say aloud. Some stories ended in shadow, a girl whose kiss was carved into a scandal, a baker who waited for a poet who never returned, a knight who died not in battle, but in a room full of words he couldn't speak. Yet even these fragments are acts of resistance. They say, we were here, not perfect, not always allowed, but present, breathing. And perhaps that is the lesson this strange, quiet revolution left behind. That history is not just made by kings and crusades. It is sewn together by letters never sent, by glances that chose tenderness over fear, by women who chose not to forget, by men who dared to feel. The bells did not ring again. The courts did not apologize, but the ink outlasted both. The ink learned to sing, not as hymns, but as truths wrapped in poetry. And it found its way not just into books, but into us. So if you've made it here,
past the cloisters and the gallows, past the whispers of forbidden beds and the echo of laughter behind shuttered doors, then you already carry something those centuries tried to erase. A softness, a knowing, a thread of empathy that makes you not just a reader of history, but part of it. Because stories like these, they don't ask to be believed, only remembered.
If you're still here, listening, thank you. Not for agreeing, not for admiring, but for being the kind of soul who stayed. Through whispers, through shadows, through stories that asked for nothing but patience. You didn't just listen to history. You cradled it. You gave the forgotten a second breath. You let love, once silenced, speak again. This journey was never meant to be loud. It was a soft rebellion, one told in sighs, in glances, in pages that time almost buried. And in you, it was remembered. There's no need to clap, no need to share. But if tonight, as the world quiets, you find yourself thinking of a nun who dreamed by candlelight, or a knight who loved too late, then the story worked. Then we both did our part. Stories never really end. They just wait until someone is gentle enough to ask them to begin again. So whenever you're ready, come back.